Welcome to our Rainbow Studio here as we are part of the Yawa vlog. It means that we're returning to our presentation on Appalling Twistianity. In our last episode, we had delved into what Paul wrote in the seventh chapter of Romans. And the reason I did so is I wanted to demonstrate just how irrational Paul was. There was no logical fallacy that he didn't relish abusing. He reminds me really of Christians today when they never listen to the long form of one of these presentations, but they're very quick to comment, and very derogatorily, mind you, on the shorts, which are a 1 minute cut from what we are revealing over the course of an hour. And the hour is part of what is 100 or so hours on these subjects, both in writing. They never go to Twistianity, which is where I'm quoting from. And all of those books are available in their entirety free at yadayah.com. If you want to read what I have written and challenge it or learn from it, your choice, you go to yadayah.com and you will find towards the bottom of the page, if you click on the books, that you will find this series called Twistianity. There's 5 volumes. They are entirely free in the presentation, and you can read them as a flip book, which is kind of fun on your phone or on a computer, the way that the books flip from page to page. We've even made it possible for you to copy and paste from them, which is typically not possible in these kinds of presentations, but we enabled that. We enabled you to search them and to bookmark them and all sorts of nice things, so that it actually feels like you're holding a book, but an electronic book. It's an exceedingly fun way to read. And you can do so on your tablet or your phone or on a laptop or on your television or on a computer screen. We've sized it so that it fits in all of those different formats. Uh, but beyond that, we also have a free PDF of every one of the books. So if you just like to read in the PDF form, don't like the subtleties and the nuances of the flip book, that's fine too. And if your preference is for the old fashioned form and you like to hold paper in your hand, well, then the tree of knowledge in this regard is available to you at Amazon, where you can Google my name, Craig Wynn, or Google Yada Yawa, the Yada Yawa series, and it will take you to all 35 books that are available through Amazon. They're offered royalty free. Amazon won't, of course, print them for free or ship them for free, but they will offer them to you at a surprisingly low price, considering the breadth of knowledge they reveal, and the fact that many of these books are 825 pages and still under $20, which is indeed remarkable as a value, and they will change your life. I mean, what is your soul worth? So you have access to all of that, and of course you can go to yadayah.com, click on media, where you will immediately see that there are some 15 different places where you can review the Yawa blog, and they're presented by topic. So if Appalling Christianity is of interest to you, you can hear the long forms on every one of these and benefit from them. I mean, if you think as a Christian that you can refute what I'm saying, good luck with that. You would have to, of course, prove everything that I'm saying is untrue, which, of course, would be impossible, because nothing that I'm conveying to you is untrue. And if you can't prove that it's all untrue, then your New Testament isn't true. And I eviscerate it from every possible angle. The quality of the text, the very fact that there are more discrepancies between the oldest witnesses and the Textus Receptus than there are words, by almost 2 times. That many of the things that are the most important parts of the Christian New Testament were actually added by Eusebius in the 4th century CE, hundreds of years later. That it was Paul who wrote the first 14 letters that became the books of the Christian New Testament, and they all existed before there was a gospel, which also happens to be Paul's term. And the first two were written by Paul's pals, conveying Paul's gospel idea, such that there isn't a single citation from the caricature presented as gospel Jesus in Paul's letters. Not one citation ever. And so, how is it possible that somebody who claims that they were appointed to represent someone never once quotes them? Well, the reason is there were nothing to quote because the Gospels had not yet been written and wouldn't be written until 10 years after Paul wrote these letters, after Paul's death. So, it's exceedingly easy to disprove, and Romans 7 is a great example into the logical fallacies that are constantly presented by Paul. This happens to begin with a non sequitur. One thing doesn't follow the other. It is also being presented as a straw man, and that Paul is setting up something to argue against that doesn't actually exist. All rational fallacy. So it begins. Or alternatively, E, you are presently ignorant, brothers. He loves to call other people ignorant. He is constantly lashing out as his audience. And the reason he's doing that is because during his lifetime, virtually no one believed him. When he died, there were, according to Paul, everyone had rejected him, and there was only one person that still thought he had any credibility. Unfortunately, there were three, in addition to Timothy, his love interest. He also had Mark and Luke, who continued to promote his mythology. But Paul died alone, rejected. If you read the opening to the book of Galatians, which we are now covering, he lambasts the Galatians, saying, "What is it? You pretended like you believed me when I was there, and then you all completely rejected me when I'm gone." The same is true of the letters to Corinth and Thessalonica. They're all written the same way. Total rejection. So it reminds me of Muhammad, when 100% of those who actually knew Muhammad and listened to him when he was first revealing all of this rejected him. So what is it that those who knew Paul and Muhammad best were able to deduce directly from him to universally reject him or them that people can't figure out today? Why would you believe him now when everyone rejected him that knew him? So this begins. Or alternatively, are you presently ignorant, brothers, knowing and understanding then the Torah? I say that the Torah is like a lord and master ruling over the man for however long and to whatever degree he lives. Now, this is what's called a straw man. It doesn't mean one iota of difference of what I, Paul, say, because I, Paul, say it was wrong. And so you can't say, brothers, knowing, understanding then the Torah. I say that the Torah is like a lord and master. Yahweh would refute that. Yahweh would say the Torah is based on the verb yara in Hebrew, and therefore it means the source of information that leads to instruction, directions, guidance, and teaching. That's what yara means. It's the verbal root of Torah. There is no lord and master in directions, in guidance, in teaching, or instructions.
Not the law.
No, it's not law. And the myth that it represents law is religious. And so Paul was educated by his own admission to be a rabbi. And therefore, as a rabbi, they want the Torah to be law. Why? Because they wrote the law. Because why? There are no laws in the Torah. So the rabbis wrote the laws that they could use to control people. And Paul picked right up on this and decided that he would run with the same lie. But that's the lie of Judaism. And it's in complete conflict with Yahweh's instructions. The Torah is guidance and teaching, and guidance and teaching are not lords and masters ruling over anyone. So he says, but the Torah is like the Lord and Master ruling over the man for however and whenever degree that he lives. So in his straw man, the Torah only has, lordship, if you will, while the man lives, but the Torah doesn't have lordship when the man dies. That is to say, the Torah is somehow affected by whether a man lives or dies. And of course, that's not true. The Torah is, according to Yahweh, was true, is true, will always be true. When he returns and he to reaffirm and reestablish his covenant relationship, it's going to be on the basis of the Torah. He's literally writing the Torah inside of those who survive this time of troubles that commence here in a matter of months. And so it's the Torah, his guidance and teaching, that endures forever. We're told not to add from it. We're told not to take away from it. And so the Torah is totally independent of whether a person lives or dies. The Torah will determine whether after your life you continue to live, or if you continue to endure in Sheol or in Shamaim, or your soul simply dissipates into nothingness. So the Torah can determine the fate of your soul based upon your response to it. But your response to the Torah, as in, but I say that to the Torah, has zero weight. It is less important than navel length with God. So this is not only a straw man, it is a absurd one that is being set up as a rational fallacy. To explain, I'm going to explain my straw man here, is what Paul is saying. Under the male, a woman to a living man is bound, restricted, and imposed and imprisoned in the Torah. No. What he's doing here is he's creating a scarecrow as opposed to a normal straw man. I am married. My wife is living with me, but she is not bound and restricted to the Torah. She is liberated and empowered by the Torah. And so the fact that I am alive, or if I were to pass away, does not change in any way the Torah's influence over my wife, who is exactly the opposite of this. She is liberated. She is empowered. She is enhanced in every possible way by the Torah. So my life or death as a husband has no influence over the Torah, and it has no influence on her relationship to the Torah. So this again is, well, they have a word for it.
Controlling women.
Oh, well, stupid to
Misogyny.
well, he's trying to pretend that in the Torah that women are controlled, they're lorded over by the Torah, or by the Torah. That women are lorded over. No, that under the male, a woman to a living man is bound, restricted, or imprisoned in the Torah. So he's implying that the Torah gives the man the right to restrict and imprison women. Now, what's interesting is while the Torah doesn't do that, the Torah has absolutely nothing to say about a man restricting or imprisoning or being such that a woman is bound to him through the Torah. Well, that is not said at all. In Appalling Christianity, Paul is the one who said that men lord over their wives. So this is pure hypocrisy. In other words, what Paul opined about Christianity that he was promoting, women are bound to their man and they're restricted and lorded over by their man, where in the Torah they are liberated in all possibilities, so in all situations. So again, this is not only a false straw man that he is positioning here. He is inverting reality. So, so you can't have a but if everything you've said so far is untrue. But if the man should die, it provides release from the Torah of the man. Okay, three fallacies here. First of all, my death does not release my wife from the Torah. Her life is empowered by, inspired by, enlightened by the Torah, and my life or death would only have an effect on that, in that we spend a lot of our time talking about the Torah, and she contributes to my understanding, I contribute to her understanding. So our life together is richer in the Torah and would be more would be less vibrant with one of the two of us being gone. But my death or her death does not change in any way our relationship to God's instructions. God's instructions are the same regardless of one of us living or not living. And so there is no release because A, you're not imprisoned to the Torah, you're liberated, you're literally emancipated as a person from religion and politics through God's Torah. And second of all, it is not the Torah of man. So every aspect of what was conveyed here is wrong. There is no release because there's no bondage. There is no correlation between one's life and one's death and the ongoing influence of the Torah. And the Torah is not of the man. The Torah is of the God. It's Yahweh's Torah, not the man's Torah. The man's Torah would be the Talmud
Or the Christian Bible.
or Paul's rhetoric. But Yahweh's Torah, which is the first 5 books that you would view as part of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, the first 5 books are Torah. Now, that is a little misleading, however, because if you read the prophets, Yahweh's Torah is pervasive through the prophets. All of Yahweh's teaching and guidance and direction and instruction are incorporated throughout the prophets, which is why Torah is written throughout them. And in the Torah, there are many prophetic statements. So the Torah contains prophecy, and the prophets contain Torah. They are integrated. Torah and prophets are a cohesive whole. For example, Paul wants to quote the Torah and prophets as prophecy to prove the legitimacy of his caricature. But you can't do that rationally if you're denouncing the Torah. If you're denouncing the Torah, you can't use the Torah to validate your claims. And this is something that Paul does with great regularity. He twists and misquotes the Torah to validate his claims regarding his mythical construct of Jesus. But if you're denouncing the Torah, which he is here, saying that the Torah enslaves the woman and that the Torah is of man, then to cite it to validate your claims, as he attempts to do, is a rational fallacy. So here we have a straw man, a corrupt scarecrow, and 3 non sequiturs that are all erroneous deductions from the truth. So if you believe that your Christian New Testament is the Word of God, then why is the man who wrote the first 14 books lying through his teeth? That's a tough question for you to ponder. Everything he said here is untrue and it's irrational. So if the man that wrote the first 14 books of the Christian New Testament is committing logical fallacies and misstating Yahweh's purpose with his Torah and creating straw men and non sequiturs, you have a problem. That can't be the inerrant word of God. I mean, Satan's smarter than this. As a result, then, would be a non sequitur because it does not follow what he has claimed to be true. And if you start with a false statement, then what follows is a straw man argument. So again, there cannot be, as a result then, because all he has done so far is to lie. But as a result, then, accordingly, with the man living, an adulteress she will be considered if she may come to be with another man. Now, this is wrong true, because the fact of the matter is that when adultery is discussed in the Torah, it is about religion and about the people being unfaithful by cheating on God with false gods like Jesus, like Hashem, like Allah, are all examples of people cheating on the relationship that God wanted to establish through the covenant with false gods. That is what he speaks of as adultery. And again, if a woman is with a who is married and is with another man, it has no impact whatsoever on the Torah. It's independent of the Torah. Now, the other thing that's really interesting here is that while Christianity came up with this monogamy concept, now it's a polygamous religion with multiple gods and goddesses, but it came up with this polygamous concept, and God doesn't have that. Doesn't. First of all, in the Torah, there's actually no word for marriage. There are no marriage vows. That whole Christian thing, until death do you part, you take this one man, this one woman, and forsake all other, that does not exist in the Torah. The people that are most engaged with God, who are considered right with God, the exemplars that God sets forth, very often have many sexual partners. Dode, God's beloved son, had 18. Solomon, who was, a profoundly important prophet, at least early in his life, had so many, I don't think anybody wants to venture to count them. So it is normal in the Torah and for the time for there to be more than one marriage partners. And there is no such thing as fornication in the sense of sexual relations outside of marriage, because there is no actual definition even of marriage. So this whole prudish concept of adultery and monogamy and this sort of thing, this is a man-made construct that is being presented here. You are far more liberated by God in terms of you being able to enjoy sexuality and being able to experience sexuality with a wider variety of partners than Christianity can even contemplate. God has very few restrictions in this regard. He says, don't do the lammies. We bestiality, bad. Necrophilia, doing somebody who is dead, yeah, that's really disgusting. Don't do that either. Incest, oh my. Incest is exceedingly troubling because it just warps the entire concept of family and of parents and of children. Don't do that. Pedophilia, bad. Don't do that. Rape, nah, that's not good either. Don't do rape. Do you have consensual relationships? And when it comes to what he talks about a man lying with another man, it has all to do with the way that victorious soldiers who had been out away from their women and living miserable lives dealt with the vanquished, where they would force themselves sexually on the men that they had vanquished. And God says, now that's pretty revolting. Don't do that either. Look, God has very few things he says don't do. But he never says, I want you to limit your sexual experience with your one and only wife and don't have any sex until you're married. There's no such thing as that. As a result, then, accordingly, with the man living An adulteress she will be considered if she comes to be with another man. But if the man might die, she is free from the Torah, her not being an adulteress by being with another man. This is another rational fallacy. She is not free from the Torah if her man dies. We've gone through this. I mean, this is not rational. It's illogical for Paul to try to make this claim, but nonetheless, he's trying to make this claim to denounce the Torah. But the fact is, the Torah is what it is, regardless of anyone. And she is not a slave to the Torah while her man lives, nor free of the Torah if her man dies. Her relationship to the Torah is whatever she has chosen it to be. And the Torah exists as it is, regardless of her perceptions of it. So that's 7:3. So as a result, brothers of mine, and they're, by the way, they're not brothers of his, because if he were talking to fellow Jews, they would know he was talking nonsense, and they would have laughed him out of town. But he's not speaking to fellow Jews, so they're not brothers, because guess what? He wrote this letter to the
Gentiles, the goy.
Well, the Romans.
The Romans.
It's called the letter's called Romans. The Romans were not his brothers. The Romans were definitely not brothers of the Jews. So he's lying when he talks about brothers of mine, who he just, by the way, called ignorant. So the Romans were ignorant of the Torah, so he could tell them anything. But you can't go and call them brothers, which he has used that term twice. When he is a Jew, they're not. When they are ignorant of the Torah, yes, but he just called them ignorant, period. So as a result, brothers of mine, which is a lie, you all were put to death in the Torah by way of the body of the Christo. Now, that is all out lie. The people he was talking to, the Romans, were not put to death by the Torah. They put Dode, who is the exemplar of the Torah, to death, but that would be the opposite of what is claimed here. The Torah did not put them to death. I mean, it's obvious that it didn't put them to death. It's obvious that he is lying. So why would he do that? Why would he say that the Torah, you all were put to death in the Torah? No, they didn't even know the Torah. They had no clue what the Torah said. And most certainly, they weren't put to death in the Torah. I mean, the Romans knew death better than almost anybody. I can assure you that the Romans knew what it was like to be put to death, because they were really good at perpetrating death. I'm not sure anyone has been better at killing, really, until we came up with, man came up with Islam and Marxism. They're better at killing than the Romans were, but the Romans were par excellence. They were the most savage civilization in human history prior to Islam and prior to Marxism. Anyway, so you were all put to death in the Torah. An absolute lie. They didn't even know the Torah, and they were not dead. And the body of the Christo, there was no Christo. Never existed. His body would be irrelevant because he didn't exist. He never lived. The whole thing is a lie. Paul would write 14 letters introducing the Iusu Christou between 52 CE and 66 CE, which would have been anywhere from 20 to 30 years after the fact, and almost all of the letters distributed to people who were nowhere close to where these things took place. In fact, I think all of the letters were to people who were nowhere in the proximity of any of this and knew nothing of it, and he was just making it up as he went along. There was no one named Christou, Mr. Christou, Sir Christou, Iusu Christou in the province of Yehuda in the first century. No one by that name, no one by that title. It is an outright and easily proved lie. And the body of a person does not cause you to be put to death. It was Dode who fulfilled Passover with his body, succumbing to the Romans taking his body. The Romans tortured and killed the body of Dode, serving as the Passover lamb. But this says the opposite. It turns Dode into Christu, which is inappropriate, but it also says that you were put to death as opposed to the Messiah being put to death. It's the opposite of what happens. The Passover lamb is put to death so that you aren't put to death. That's the Torah teaching. The whole concept of Passover, as it was first lived, is that the lamb being sacrificed, and it's sacrificed for you to eat, so it nourishes your body and creates a lovely home meal for the family, so that your firstborn son won't die. It opens the doorway to life, is the whole purpose of Passover. So the body of the lamb dies to nourish the family so that the family can live. It's the opposite of what Paul just said. You don't die because of the Passover lamb. The Passover lamb is. Now, he didn't like that idea because that would mean that his God died. And, gods are typically not all that good if they die. A dead guy, it's typically not well respected. It is so pathetic. Anyway, so he says, so as a result, brothers of mine, they were not brothers, you were all put to death. No, they weren't. They were still living. In the Torah, no, they didn't even have a clue what the Torah is, and no one is put to death in the Torah. You could receive life by following the Torah's advice, but you're never put to death in the Torah. By way of the body of the Christu. No, it's just the opposite. It's the body of the Messiah that was sacrificed as the Passover lamb that enables them to live. So it was the opposite of what he said there again. Into you all become of another, to the dead, having been awakened and arising in order to bear fruit of the God. Now, that is what we call a word salad. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of word salad. Is you just throw out a bunch of words and they don't have any correlation with one another. There may be a verb, there may be a pronoun, there may be a subject, there may be an object, but it's really kind of all irrelevant because what you just said is gibberish. So this is gibberish. Into you all become of another, to the dead, having been awakened and arising in order to bear fruit of the God. Huh? Okay. You are not dead. You are not awakened. You are not arising. This idea that you are awakened and you arise to bear fruit is really stupid. No. First of all, there is no fruit of the God, and God isn't Theos, and this was a placeholder for Theos. God's name is Yahweh. If you don't use God's name, then you're not speaking for God. If you're not speaking for Yahweh, you're not speaking for God. I had a guy write me, says, I'm just going to reject anything that uses a peculiar name for God that isn't documented in either the Hebrew or Greek.
Yahweh? Hello.
And you think, okay, pal, Yahweh's name isn't in the Greek. There is no name for God in the Greek text. So if you're searching for a name of God, and that's your validation, the name of God in the Greek text, you won't find it, because guess what's never written in the Christian New Testament, in the Greek text that underlays the Christian New Testament? Yahweh's name. Never once. And because it's never once written, we know it didn't get inspired from Yahweh. Plus the fact Yahweh doesn't commit rational fallacies, nor does he contradict himself, nor does he speak against his plans. And in the Hebrew text of the Torah, prophets, and Psalms, there's only one name for God. Yod He Wahe. And if you don't know how to pronounce it, it's because you're just not thinking, because God told you how to pronounce it when he said that his name was based on the verb Haya. And Haya tells you how to pronounce 3 of the 4 letters. And if you want to pronounce the other letter, look at the book into which it was revealed. The very thing that's being talked about here, the Torah, it tells you how to pronounce the Wa as well as the He. And so you have reinforcement. It is easy. That's the only way God's name is ever written. And here, there is no fruit of the God. The fruit is actually important concept. It is para and peri are the 2 Hebrew terms for bearing fruit. And it is an essential concept presented throughout the Torah that there are specific individuals whom God enables to bear fruit. And the fruit that they bear happens to be saved souls. But the God is not bearing the fruit. It's those individuals that he chooses to work through. One of the individuals is known as the tree of knowledge, and that individual bears fruit. The Adama Parah, that is the sacrifice on Teruah, Parah means he bears fruit. So Paul's got this all upset, and that you are not raised to life, nor you're not killed in your mortal time, nor are you raised to life. If you accept the terms and conditions of the covenant, you go from your mortal existence to an eternal existence, but your body is irrelevant to the process, and your body is gone. And that's the only way they would have known dead and dying is a body, and the body has no purpose in the entire equation. So once again, all it has been is a steady diet of lies. That's Romans 7:4. So this is a leap out of irrational ignorance into the mind-numbing reign of utter stupidity. There is no correlation between the widow's husband dying and the Romans being put to death. None. Dying there, and while the Romans murdered hundreds of thousands of Torah observant Jews, very few Romans were killed because of the Torah, and none in Paul's audience. Dod's Bashar, corporal body, serving as the Passover lamb, upheld and affirmed the Torah so that we might live. Just the opposite. Therefore, to suggest that the fulfillment of Passover equates to the death of the Torah is a non sequitur. For when we were in the flesh, the suffering and misfortune of being evil, offensive, and errant was the result of the Torah operating and functioning in our bodies to bear the fruit of death. Romans 7:5. For that to be written by Paul in his most famous and important letter, and for there to have been a single Christian, I mean, one, not 2.5 billion today, one, just shows that to be a believer, you are foregoing evidence and reason, that you're incapable of thinking rationally. There is a word for it. It's called stupid. So to be a Christian, you must be stupid. That is what this just said. If you can't process that, then indeed you're operating entirely on faith and outside the realm of reason. So when Paul, who was writing in Greek, spoke of the flesh and of the spirit, he is promoting a belief system that was very popular among the Greeks and the Romans. It was conceived by the Greeks, and it had a Greek name. It's called Gnosticism. Gnostic is somebody who knew. So it's Gnosticism, and means to know. And the primary theme of Gnosticism that was promoted by the Greek philosophers was that there were two worlds, one known, the other unknown, one of the flesh, the other of the spirit. And that the world that we know, oh, bad, 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 terrible, bad. And the world that we don't know, good, good, good. So this would have, if you were to buy that, that would mean that God created a really awful world and that you were bad, bad, bad. Your bodies were bad. Your very physical nature was bad. The earth was bad. Everything bad, bad. Now, of course, God says when he created the earth, and he said, yeah, that's good. When he created life, he said, oh, that's good. When he created man, he said, oh, that's good. So God's point of view is, I created it to be good. If you want to corrupt it, that's up to you, but I created it to be good. The Gnostic would say, no, it's all bad. And the only thing that's good is that which you cannot perceive, that which you cannot see, that which you can never appreciate or actually understand. We're just telling you that, okay, your life is miserable now, but bear with us because, well, maybe somehow through some belief or mystical fashion, you might have a better life going forward. It's the whole selling point of religion. We're controlling you. We're making your life miserable. We're robbing you of everything. But bear with us, because if you agree with us and you surrender, then in the next life, we'll promise you something that's better. It's like Islam. That is the very basis of Islam. And it's the way that Christianity was promoted. That is what's being presented here. The flesh, reality bad. Unreality, faith, what I'm selling you as a construct out of my own mind that I want you to believe, because, by the way, I can't prove any of it. Yahweh proves everything that he states in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. The authors of the Christian New Testament, like Paul, never once give you any reason to believe them. Never once. Just believe me.
Love me or die.
Well, from when we were the flesh, the suffering and misfortune. There is a lot of suffering and misfortune in the flesh, but you know why? Religion. Things like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, lots of suffering. And it has been true throughout the history of civilization. Individual men can be good or bad. Collectively, men are always bad. And so the suffering and misfortune is a direct result of human civilization. It's a function of man that there is suffering and misfortune, because individual people can be good or bad, but never in the case of large institutions. In fact, the larger in this institution, the worse it became. Rome was a particularly large empire. They were incredibly horrible. It's suffering and misfortune is their trademark. You look at Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan. They created the largest ancient civilization, time after the Romans, of course, and they were so brutal that their entire mantra was, the only way that people will fail to capitulate to us and give us tribute and bow the knee to us is that if they don't, we will torture them and create mass murder on a scale that has never been conceived previously. So it's man that has chosen to gang up and be evil, perpetrating suffering and misfortune. It's God's plan to have you be free of those things. So rather than the suffering coming from God's plan, the Torah, and it operating in you, which is to liberate you, man's plan is to impose evil, offensive suffering of Christianity, and the Roman Catholic Church being a great example of that. So once again, Paul's point is the antithesis of what's true. What do you call the opposite of what's true?
False.
False.
A lie.
There you go. That's what the Christian New Testament is comprised of. So when we were of the flesh, the suffering, misfortune of being evil, offensive, and errant was the result of the Torah. So where does the Torah say, you shalt be evil? You shall suffer misfortune?
Doesn't say.
No, the Torah says, if you listen to what I say in the Torah, if you take the Torah to heart, if you benefit from my guidance and my instruction and my teaching, then all of these wonderful things will happen to you. If you choose to reject my Torah, which is your option, then you're going to bring all of these negative things upon you. So the Torah is the remedy for being oppressed, for being evil, for suffering. and misfortune. If you learn from the Torah, you will suffer none of those things. If you choose to reject the Torah, then you will endure all of them. The opposite of what Paul is saying. But imagine this idiot, Paul, claimed earlier in his first letter that he was appointed by the God. And now he is taking the book that the God inspired to liberate us from religion and politics so that we could know him and be emancipated and enriched and empowered. And he's saying that the Torah is evil and offensive, that God's primary document to man, Paul is calling evil, offensive, and errant. And he's saying that the Torah is the cause of suffering and misfortune.
That makes Yahweh incompetent.
Well,
And that's not, it just infuriates me.
It infuriates me. I mean, it's hard for me to contain myself with my disgust for not just Paul, but for all of you Christians who believe him. Because you're spitting in God's face. You're pretending to be godly while spitting in God's face. You are trusting and believing in a man and a book that says that the Torah is the source of all evil and misfortune, when it is exactly the opposite. When God confirms and reaffirms his Torah in the end, why would he put his Torah inside of us if the purpose was to be evil and tormenting? Why create man and then give man teaching in the Torah only to torment what you created? Is your God Satan? That makes God Satan.
Just like Allah.
The Torah operating and functioning in our bodies, not in our souls. The Torah does not function in your body, by the way. And the Torah either lives and influence us as it relates to our souls and our minds as they influence our souls, or not at all. The Torah is not fixated on the body. The Torah really doesn't care about your body. One of the most interesting things is when Moshe speaks about what you should and shouldn't eat, and he's saying early in Deuteronomy, you can eat whatever you want. Doesn't matter what you eat. You can eat whatever you want. Just don't drink blood. Pour the blood on the earth, because the blood is synonymous with the life of the soul, because it is the blood of the Passover lamb that was shed to give life to the soul. It's the blood of the Adam Parah that will give new life to the mortal remnant of Yisrael. And so the blood represents the life of the soul. Don't drink it. But as for food, you can eat wherever you want. Then later, he's saying, listen, because it's your soul that matters, not your body, but since you have physical bodies now, I'm going to give you some guidance on what things are healthy and not healthy for you to eat, recognizing that none of it's going to influence your soul at all. So God's teaching is for the nephesh, the soul, and it permeates the mind to influence our soul. It's not something that has control over our bodies. It doesn't operate and function in the body. It operates and function in our minds and in our souls. And here he's saying that the Torah functions to bear the fruit of death. So the book that explains how life was conceived, the book that provides the path to eternal life, Paul has equated that God's teaching, everything he had to say through Moshe, that the primary purpose of it was to kill, was to die. And why is there a religion called Christianity? Why does it exist? Is everybody who's a Christian this stupid? Why do they have seminaries? Why hasn't somebody in a seminary said, wait a minute, how in the hell can we have the most important letter by the most important man that authored the Christian New Testament, the man that wrote the first 14 letters, the man who conceived the idea of an Iusu Christou, the man who is responsible for the religion of Christianity? And he writes that the Torah functions to produce death, to make us miserable. And he claims to speak for the God that authored the Torah. How can you not see that that's impossible? Is everyone brainwashed?
Yes.
And have they been brainwashed for 2,000 years?
Appears that way.
That's really pathetic. That was Romans 7:5. So Paul equates Yahweh's Torah teaching and guidance to the flesh because he was overtly opposed to the sign of the covenant, which is in circumcision. The reason he was opposed to the sign of the covenant, circumcision, even though he himself was circumcised and his love interest, Timothy, he personally circumcised, is because he was writing in Greek to Greeks and Romans who were just like enamored beyond all ends with their thingamajiggies and their physical form. They just thought it was grand. That's why you see so many naked statues. That's why the Olympic Games was performed naked. They were really, really into their bodies, and they thought that circumcision somehow mutilated their bodies. And so they despised circumcision. So for Paul to sell his religion to Greeks and Romans, he had to oppose circumcision. But the problem of opposing circumcision is, according to God, circumcision is the sign of the covenant. So you have to be wholly opposed to God to promote to be opposed to circumcision. But then there's a bigger problem. God says, unless a man is circumcised, he cannot participate in Passover. If you can't participate in Passover, you're going to die and stay that way, because the only door to life is in Passover. You know, you even said, you know, the body of the Christu, it's actually the body of the Messiah, Dode. It is the means to life. It is through Passover that we live. But you can't participate in Passover if you're not circumcised. So, in addition, Shaul was also appealing, as I've said, to Roman affinity and all things Greek, especially Gnosticism, where the flesh is seen inferior. Of course, the flesh is inferior unless it's Greek flesh, of which Greek boys were particularly appealing to Greek men. So that's why Paul also had to love his Timothy. So by referencing the flesh, Paul means evil, something that he admits by calling the Torah a source of pathema, suffering, misfortune, and evil afflictions. He even goes so far as to say that as a result of the Torah, harmatia, that which is evil, offensive, and errant, is brought about in us. In other words, according to Paul, the Torah is a source of evil, and it's equivalent to what Satan would ascribe to. He's a man who admits that he's demon possessed. He'll say that in his second letter to Corinth, is ascribing the Torah's purpose and agenda to Satan. That is what he's doing. Now, forgetting for a moment that it is the opposite of what's true. Where is the logic which connects the death of a woman's husband to this absurd mischaracterization of Yahweh's Torah? And how is it that God's teaching regarding what is good and bad suddenly becomes the source for bringing about that which is evil? That is like saying that a documentary film on the hazards of using illicit drugs is responsible for drug abuse. Moreover, if you think being Torahless makes a person good, you might want to look around and check out the current state of man, where 99.9999% of men are Torahless. And as a matter of fact, the President of the United States, he is the Torahless one, and you don't get any more evil than he. Lastly, since Dode's body, representing the Passover lamb, opened the doorway to life by fulfilling Passover, something which was affirmed and celebrated during firstborn children, it ought to be equated, it ought never be equated with death. It is the opposite. Anyway, he goes on. But now, at the present time, wait a minute, how did we get from where we were? But I don't know. as if the death of the Romans and their new life and them being evil and plagued to death by the Torah. But we're going to forget all that. Now, move past all that now. Okay, so now at the present time, we have been released from the Torah. How? Why? How have you been released from the Torah? Why? Why would you even want that? God tells us that the Torah exists forever, that the Torah is his teaching and guidance. As a matter of fact, when he comes back to reaffirm the covenant just 7 years from now, it will be on the basis of integrating his Torah inside of us. So you can't have been released from it under that circumstance. Did you ever read the prophet Hosea? What does God say? My people are destroyed because they're ignorant, because of their lack of knowledge, and because you have forgotten my Torah, I will forget your children. Everywhere through the prophets, same message. If you ignore the Torah, then it will be your liability. If you value the Torah, you will benefit from it and everything God has to promise. If God made a promise in the Torah, he's going to honor it. And he constantly equates his beloved son, the Messiah and Son of God, the returning King and our Savior, with the Torah. That'd be dope. But Paul is at war with the Torah because he can't create a new religion where he is the God or the man who speaks for the God if he can't condemn everything that God had to say. But here again, he uses the Torah to justify his religion. How can you use the Torah to justify your religion if you're condemning the Torah as evil? That means that you're justifying your religion with that which is evil. That's why they call it faith. But now at the present time, we have been released from the Torah, having died in that which improperly hindered and restrained us, holding us down in order to enslave us to a different and completely new spirit, and not of the old, inferior, obsolete, and former age and way of that which was written. The old and obsolete way of that which is written. No. Now it's all about what I, Paul, say. But how does but I, Paul, say replace that which was the God had written? So the God had written, oh, we're all free from that now. It's now, but I, Paul, say. But Paul justified, but I, Paul, said by quoting from that which was written. Actually, misquoting from it. But how can God's way be inferior, old, obsolete? You think that God said, okay, all right, you're right. I'm really, really old. I've been around 14 billion years already. That's a long time. I really need to back away. My plan didn't work, can't work. I don't know why I bothered with the Torah. I really don't know why I even bothered with the prophets, why I even speak to the people. I was a unmitigated failure. And I'm just going to admit that I had no clue what I was doing when I conceived life or communicated to humankind. So let's just wipe away everything I previously said. And I'm going to appoint this guy who has no concept of logic, who's going to lie about everything, who acknowledges that he is a sexual pervert, who acknowledges that he's demon possessed, and he's going to contradict everything I've said. And that's my guy. I'm going to appoint that guy to come up with a new system for the world that annuls my system because I'm incapable, but he is not our light. Let there be light. The man said we had that same issue yesterday with a lack of light. So we're trying to make it a theme, I suppose. But let there be light. All right. So there you go. That is the biggest logical fallacy of all, is that God communicated the Torah and prophets to us and conceived life and revealed himself, explained what he was offering and expected from us in return, and went through all of this, even designating the purpose of Pesach, Matzah, B'Kodim, Teruah, or Shavua, Teruah, Kippurim, and Sukkah. fulfilling the first three with his beloved son, Dode, for nothing. It was all a failed plan. In fact, it wasn't just failed, it was sadistic. That God's plan was sadistic. It was tormenting and deadly. And so God said, oh, what the hell? I can't figure this out. I'm not smart enough to figure it out. I'm going to turn to this fellow, Shaul, whose name, by the way, is synonymous with Sheol, which is hell. And he's out killing people, and he's admitting that he's a sexual pervert, and he's admitting that he's demon possessed. But let's overlook all of that. I'm going to have this guy contradict me while claiming that he represents me. And he's going to come up with a new plan that replaces my old failed plan. And then he's going to claim that all of the credential for doing this is that he was authorized by the God who failed. And so God failed, but he authorized this man to replace everything he'd written. And if you were going to believe that what he is saying now is going to prevail when he claims to speak for the God who failed, well, they have a word for that. Stupid. It's astonishing, really, how utterly ignorant this is. And, we're not picking on the worst of what Paul wrote. For Paul, it doesn't get better than Romans. This is the best of Paul, not the worst of Paul. The worst of Paul is found in Galatians. That was his first book. Well, 2 Corinthians is pretty bad too, but now at the present time, we have been released from and removed from the Torah, having died in that which was inappropriately hindering us and restraining us, holding us down in order to enslave us. Why does God say that in the first statement he etched in stone, I am Yahweh, I'm the one who released you, freed you from bondage and slavery? Why would he say that he's an emancipator if his intent was to enslave us? Why did he go into Mitzrayim to free his people from slavery if the purpose of the Torah was to enslave? Well, God said, no, the Egyptians are doing it poorly. They're enslaving you poorly. I got a much better way to enslave you. So I'm going to take you from slavery and Mitzrayim so I can enslave you properly. But that's what he's saying.
And the religious don't want to see their own hypocrisy.
Oh no, we'll have dipshit Christians that will condemn me as Satan, saying I'm stupid for pointing out the stupidity in the entire concept of Christianity. It's not just that this is stupid, and it is. It's that the entire premise of Christianity is irrational.
Yep.
Beyond the fact that God's not a man and that men can't kill God and God can't die. And bodily resurrection is counterproductive.
Details.
Oh. So here we are again. I'll get through this whole statement. I really will. It's just that my whole mind is trained that when you perceive a logical fallacy, a lie, a misstatement, it's my responsibility to point it out to you. And there are like hundreds already that have been stated in Paul's diatribe here. So it's very difficult for me to get through the whole thing without correcting it, because that if I read over it, when I know it's a fallacy or an outright lie, it gives tacit acceptance of it. And I don't want to do that, because everything here, this is literally a brew of toxicity. But now at the present time, we have been released from and removed from the Torah. Yeah, I'd like you to find where God said that. I'll give you, we've got 7.5 years left. I'll give you all 7.5 years. I'll meet you on the Temple Mount. In fact, in 4 years from now, we can have this debate. You tell me where God said, by the way, name is Yahweh, so that will be helpful, where you're going to be released from the Torah. Because when Yahweh says in Jeremiah 31, the only place where you can even get an inkling of a renewed covenant would be when God says, when I reestablish the covenant, and by the way, he's reestablishing it with Yehudim and Yisrael. He said so right in the text. Read it. Therefore, not with the church and not with Goyim, that he is going to do so by incorporating the Torah into our lives, literally writing it into the fabric of our lives. So that would mean that you're not being released from it. That would mean that from God's point of view, it's beneficial to you. Just saying. Anyway, I'm promised I'm going to get through it this time. But now at the present time, we have been released from and removed from the Torah, having died. Well, then it's too late for you. I'm sorry. And that which inappropriately hindered and restrained us, holding us down. Torah is so depressing. God, teaching from God. Wow. Okay, I said I was going to make it through here. In order to enslave us, I went through that point, to a different and completely new of spirit, and not of old, inferior, obsolete, and former age and way of that which is written. I think he meant to say is, okay, out with the old and with the new. I'm bringing in the new. God was of the old. Me, myself, and I, Paul, are of the new. And so I'm now taking you away from that obsolete former thing. We're going to call it an Old Testament because I like that term because it sounds like the will and testament of a dead God. So we'll call it the Old Testament. And we'll call what I'm doing the New Testament because now it's new and improved because, well, it was written by me and I'm new and improved. So we're doing away with all the stuff that God wrote in that Old Testament. And now we're going to focus entirely on what I say is new. But what am I saying? What am I offering you? God proved his authenticity. What you Paul only had one prophecy and he got it wrong. That was his rapture. He said that it was going to happen in his lifetime. And he said it was going to happen on trumpets. It doesn't happen on trumpets. It's not a rapture. And it didn't occur nearly 2,000 years ago. It happens on Shabuah. And he will be absolutely excluded from it. But he got the timing wrong. He got the day wrong. He got everything wrong. He got the entire group that will be participating in it because there'll be nobody who is religious in it. All right. So Paul will say, for it is written, and then he will misquote God to validate some point he's making. So it is written, he misquotes God to validate his point. And here he is saying, I'm taking you away from all of that which is written because it's cruel, mean, and deadly. Now, that alone, if you're rational, will cause you not to be a Christian anymore. I have said that there isn't a single person, because I've tested this over the last 15 years, that has and can read even one of the 5 volumes of Twistianity and remain a Christian. It's absolutely not possible. I mean, you'll be so worn down trying to defend Christianity that you will give up at the end of one chapter. So if you're going to maintain the belief in the lie, you're going to, by the time you're through with one chapter, you're so beat up. You mean, boom, 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 boom. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hits. By the time you're through the first chapter, you will give up if you're going to choose to continue to believe the lie. But at that point, you'll know you're believing a lie, and it's going to haunt you forever. And if you read on, you'll say, oh my God, how was I ever fooled by that? Well, anyway, this is so incongruous. It staggers the mind to realize that billions of souls have been beguiled by Paul's rubbish. As noted, there is absolutely no correlation between the death of a woman's husband and her being released from the Torah. And there is no correlation between this hypocritical and hypothetical individual death and either the ongoing status of the Torah being affected by the man's death, or being told that we're not to observe it if the man's living or dead, or Paul saying, well, I've changed it. Further, I would be surprised if there was a single individual in Paul's audience, ever one, who had chosen to be bound to the Torah. Ever one. Which means that he could not be released from it. So if there's not a single individual in Paul's audience that ever chosen to be bound to the Torah, and all likelihood there'd be none, there's no one who could be released from it. There would be no one. The choice to accept or reject the Torah and its promises and provisions is ours alone. Yahweh does not impose his teaching. He does not mandate his guidance or its benefits. In fact, his preference is that if you're not smart enough to know this is a lie, that you not be influenced by it. He doesn't want you to read it. If you're this stupid to be a Christian, you're going to believe such nonsense. You don't understand the value of evidence and reason. You will believe a man who is lying to you, and you're not smart enough to figure it out. God doesn't even want you to read the Torah. He doesn't want you to be part of his family. He has no interest in saving you and spending an eternity with you. None. So you're free of the Torah, all right, because you can't be bound to it. You can't benefit from it. It is off limits to you. And to every Roman that he spoke to, who was always religious and political, and to every Greek, political or religious Greek that he wrote to and spoke to, the Torah was off limits to them. It wasn't something that could bind them. There wasn't a single Roman or Greek that was bound to the Torah. And no one can be bound to the Torah. It's not possible. And no one in his audience was. So what he was talking about was just utter nonsense. According to God, his Torah liberates us. That's the first statement he wrote in stone. Freeing us from slavery. Christians love the 10 commandments. Oh, look, there's actually no commandments. There's 10 statements and instructions. And the first of those says that God is the opposite of a lord. He is the opposite of one who enslaves. The whole concept was you were enslaved by religion and politics. I freed you from that stuff. Freeing us from slavery, from death, and from judgment. But not according to Paul. His garbled and concocted version of the Torah hinders and enslaves. Paul's answer is to reject the Platis Gamma, the old and obsolete way which was written, and with a Kanotis Sunoma, a completely different and recent spirit. But at least now we know we've come face to face with Paul admitting that my interpretation of his open statement in Galatians was correct. The old system that he is calling poneros in the opening sentence of Galatians, his first letter, corrupt and harmful, pornography, is in fact the Torah. He has just affirmed that in Romans. I know there are a couple of people that say, well, Paul is misunderstood and he is mistranslated, and he didn't really mean to say Torah. He was talking about the Talmud. BS. There is no reference to the Talmud. The Talmud existed. It was a name that a title he could have used. And every time he references the Torah, he quotes from the Torah. Well, he misquotes from the Torah. In fact, if he quotes something that has the word Torah in it, he uses the word Torah. So, come on. So, based upon his insistence and his use of Torah in his argument, we are left with no other viable alternative. Moreover, for those who would claim that Paul was assailing the oral law of the rabbis, the Talmud, think again. Paul's enemy was the gramma written nomos Torah, not the oral Torah, which became the Talmud. And let's never lose sight of the fact that in Galatians 3:10, a statement we'll consider, and we have already considered it as an earlier version of this program, and we will consider again, Paul himself translates the Hebrew word Torah using the Greek term nomo. So if Paul literally translates, there is Torah in the text, he quotes that text, and where that text in Hebrew says Torah, and he replaces it with the Greek word nomo, what does nomo mean?
Torah.
End of question, right? Of course, by calling the Torah a Platos, an old, inferior, obsolete, antiquated, and arcane system of a previous age, Paul is once again projecting a message which is in complete and irreconcilable conflict, I should say, with God's testimony regarding his Torah. He says exactly the opposite. One is not speaking for the other. The one is contradicting the other. Shaul is contradicting Yahweh on behalf of his completely different and recent, unprecedented and unheralded spirit. Well, Yahweh's Ruach spirit is well attested in the Torah and prophets. And if he has a different spirit, it isn't Yahweh's. Whose spirit do you think that might be? Well, he told you, Satan's. And that means that the spirit Paul is advocating is not Yahweh's spirit, the Ruach Kodesh, the set-apart spirit of the Torah. Therefore, what spirit do you suppose Paul is advocating? Do you know of a spirit adversarial to Yahweh who is also opposed to the Torah, who would misquote the Torah, who would argue against the Torah, who would accuse Jews of all manner of things that they didn't do, who would lie to Gentiles?
Hasatan.
Hasatan, the adversary. Yeah, I know of him, and I suspect you do as well. So all I can say is that I'm glad to have this wicked man and this demonic spirit out of my life. Christians, you can have him. Now, as ignorant and as irrational as this argument has been thus far, it is about to get, well, the point of just completely ludicrous, ridiculous to the point of comical. I kid you not. What, therefore, shall we say? Who is we? He has a frog in his pocket now? What, therefore? Therefore, based upon, I've just spewed out a word salad and a whole bunch of lies and logical fallacies. Oh, but what, therefore, shall we, with the frog in his pocket, say? The Torah is misleading, errant, and offensive. But I tell you what, just read him. Just to have those words come out of my mouth and to think that somebody could take a segment of this and to say, well, Craig Wynn, he says that the Torah is misleading, errant, and offensive. No, Paul wrote that, and Paul was wrong. In fact, what he wrote was satanically inspired. The Torah is the opposite of that. The Torah leads us to the truth. It is reliable, it is accurate, and it is the single most pleasing and beneficial thing ever written. It's hard to read this because I don't like those words even in my mouth. They have a foul taste that is difficult to say. So understand, I'm reading the words of Paul to condemn Paul, the Christian New Testament, the entire myth of Christianity, the very mythos that there was a Jesus Christ. I am demonstrating what he said is untrue. What I will now read is all false, the opposite of what I'm reading to you now from Paul's letter, translated from, by the way, the oldest manuscript of Paul's letter. So there is 0% possibility that this is an errant presentation of what Paul said. 0, because I translated this from the earliest papyrus of Paul's letters. This was Papyri 45. It dates to the 2nd century. There's nothing earlier. If this isn't accurate, there is no way to be accurate, which is fine with me, but not good for Christianity. What, therefore, shall we say? The Torah is misleading, errant, and offensive. If only it were not so. May it not be, or I wish it was not true. He's lying. It's written in the aorist, which means this state exists without regard to any process or plan. In the middle voice, which is subject, the subject, which would be Paul, as the speaker, is acting on his own initiative. And in the optative mood, the implied subject is conveying his personal wishes and desires regarding a mere possibility. God speaks in black and white when it comes to his Torah. There's right and wrong, good and bad, truth and lies. The Torah is true. Religion is a lie. Nevertheless, I would not have actually known that which is evil, sinful, and wrong, if not through the Torah. Yeah, the Torah says, it's not a good idea to make a practice of killing. It's not a good idea to make a practice of lying. That, bearing false witness is probably a bad idea. That You shouldn't covet what belongs to others. The Torah's got some guidance this way. The Torah says, don't be religious. Being religious, bad. Don't change or negate Yahweh's name. That isn't forgivable. So Paul would not have known that being a sexual pervert is bad. He wouldn't know that murder was bad if it hadn't been for the Torah. He would know that lying is bad if it hadn't been for the Torah. It's the Torah that told him what was bad. And if the Torah didn't say it was bad, then lying wouldn't be bad, I guess. Bearing false witness wouldn't be bad. Killing wouldn't be bad if the Torah didn't say so. If the Torah didn't say that false gods will get you killed, then must not be so. Won't be so. You're not going to die. If there was no Torah, you would never die. Is that what Paul's point of view is? Then why did Paul die? Then this is, ludicrous. For I would not have actually known that which is evil, sinful, and wrong, if not for the Torah. So if the Torah tells you it's wrong, then it must not be wrong if the Torah didn't say so. Does that make it right? Mass murder is all of a sudden right.
No.
False witness is right. Coveting is right. Stealing must be right because God says don't do it. Changing Yahweh's name must be right because God says don't do it. Calling God a Lord and the Torah is enslaving when God says the opposite must be, all of this doesn't really matter anymore. Okay, so if not through the Torah. 4, also, lust and craving, I would not have been aware of if not for the Torah saying, you shall not have strong desires. By the way, the Torah doesn't say that. Doesn't say that. Doesn't say any place, you shall not have strong desires. So even again, it's a strong man. But so he's saying that he would not know that lust was a problem if the Torah didn't say so. So if the Torah didn't say so, lust would be good. But then why is Paul the one who writes, oh, no hanky-panky?
He can't keep track of his own lies.
That's Romans 7:7. Okay. If Shaul's toxic diatribe had not beguiled billions of souls, tearing them away from Yahweh and handing them over to worship Satan, which is really what it does, I would be laughing, not vomiting. How is it that a notion so absurd and irrational became the foundation of a religion that influences so many? Since Yahweh is the author of the Torah, Paul is saying that God and his testimony are misleading, errant, and offensive. And at the same time, he wants you to believe that the same God is not only speaking through him, which he claimed, but that the dim-witted deity has authorized him to vilify him. Now, he's saying this God is a sadistic nitwit, but yet it's the same God he claimed in Galatians, and the first sentence was speaking through him. Yep. And that idiot deity who was satanic and sadistic and deadly wanted Paul to vilify him. Beyond this, he wants us to believe that what he has to say about the Pauline God, who actually has deliberately misled everyone, is the same God who is inspiring him. Now, it's little wonder faith and religion are synonymous, because this is bull excrement, and that's being unkind to bulls. The God Paul claims enslaved and killed everyone. I don't know why he bothered with the Exodus. Why would you do that? The Romans, the Greeks, Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, were doing a really fine job of enslaving the Hebrews. They did about as good a job of enslaving the Hebrews as could possibly be done. How would you even try to improve on that? But yet, The Exodus was not a liberation. Moshe was not a liberator. Nope. Charleston Heston got the role all wrong. The purpose of the Exodus was to take them from the enslavement of the Egyptians and the pharaohs to really, really good enslavement. I mean, the best of enslavement. So the God Paul claims enslaved and killed everyone, now under Paul's stewardship, is suddenly transformed as a new and different spirit, providing freedom and life. And that means to Pauline salvation, you have to disassociate everyone from God's foundational thesis. The Word of God cannot be in your vocabulary if you're going to benefit from Paul's new plan. Clearly, the Torah, prophets, and Psalms of the Word of God, that's all trash. That'll kill you. So you got to believe just what Paul says. So you have to disregard the Word of God to believe the word of Paul. Moreover, the book which discourages us from going astray and being evil, according to Paul, is actually the source of evil. Really? The basis of his argument is as follows. 1, you're ignorant. 2, Paul is brilliant. 3, he says that the Torah acts as a lord. 3, women are under men. 4, the Torah binds, restricts, and imprisons women to men. 5, when a man dies, a woman is released from the inoperative Torah. 6, as a result, the woman is no longer an adulteress. 7, when the widow goes to be with another man, she is no longer enslaved to the Torah. 8, as a result, you were put to death by the Torah. 9, the body of Christu caused you and the Torah to die. 10, you came to another by dying. 11, by being awakened, you bear the fruit of Paul's God. 12, for then in the flesh, you suffer evil afflictions and uncontrollable urges. 13, you are evil. You're offensive and wrong because the Torah is operating within you, producing the fruit of death. 14, but now you have been released from the invalidated Torah. 15, so too bad that you have died. 16, because you were inappropriately hindered and held down by the Torah. 17, therefore the Torah's purpose is to enslave you. 18, but you have been released into the care of a different and completely new spirit. 19, such that you have been freed from the old, obsolete, and inferior way which was written in the Torah. 20, therefore we should say that the Torah is misleading, evil, and wrong. 21, even though we don't want to say this. 22, nonetheless, Paul would not have known that he was evil if it had not been for the Torah claiming that he was evil. 23, so therefore the Torah is responsible for Paul's lustful cravings, coveting, and sexual perversions. 24, it also killed him, but he is not dead. Got it? Are you following? What planet does any of this make sense? I don't suppose that such sublime rhetoric is such that anyone is going to confuse Paul with Plato. Not anytime soon. Hell, Hitler's oratory was sublime by comparison. I'm not sure that this is worse than Donald Trump. Well, it might be.
Might be
I don't
same
know.
influence.
About same. Yeah, same influence. But now the opportunity, the excuse, and the pretext to grasp hold of and experience that which is evil, sinful, and wrong through the commandment. It was brought about thoroughly in me, including every and all deep desire and longing. For indeed, without the Torah that was misleading, errant, and offensive, is dead and no longer an issue. Well, that's kind of a word salad, but I have a secret decoder ring that I can spin with a salad spinner and come out with an explanation of this for you. And we'll end this program on my explanation. Okay, so he's giving you all this pretext that's just total nonsense, essentially a word salad. And everything he said is factually untrue. The opposite of what he said is actually true. But now that we're gone to this point, I want you to know that the only reason that I am shown to be a liar is because the Torah calls me a liar. But you don't pay any attention to that because I'm doing away with the Torah. And now that I've done away with the Torah no longer calls me a liar, so I'm no longer a liar. Yeah. So I have a new commandment, and my new commandment is me. It is me, myself, and I. I am the new commandment because I've done away with that old commandment, because those old commandments, they showed that I was a sexual pervert and a liar, and I don't want you to perceive me as a sexual pervert and a liar. So we're doing away with all of that. I have a new commandment that is the new me, including now all of my deep desires and cravings. They no longer matter. Don't you let them bother you. Because, well, that Torah was errant, and it must have lied when it said that I was a liar. So we don't have any problems now. Got it?
Problem solved.
Problem solved, Christian. Onward, Christian soldiers. Until next time.